Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Since Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael went into government with each other, it hasn't been clear which party's ethos has been more influential. But one thing was very clear yesterday. We saw the return of Bertienomics. Fianna Fáil's infamous economic policy approach is once again leading the way. What could go wrong? Bertie once famously said, "The boom is getting boomier." And that is very much the theme of this budget. A giveaway on steroids with a multitude of one-off payments timed to hit people's pockets around the time we expect voters to go to the polls. It isn't very subtle, but I guess that's kind of the point. After all, what's the point in trying to buy an election if nobody notices? It's not like this hasn't been done before. Vote for us because we've given you back a few euro of your own money is a tried and tested formula in this country. The major problem, not just for the coalition but for the country, is that it's a formula that has been proven to fail. We all know where eroding the tax base and relying on windfall taxes got us previously. Bankrupt and with the IMF running the country. That is where the Bertie approach landed us. But seeing the standing ovation yesterday from government benches, it is clear that they have forgotten that entirely. And they are speeding ahead at full throttle, destination, general election, spraying cash around indiscriminately en route with a dizzying array of one-off payments. All of these payments will certainly be very welcome, particularly in the run-up to Christmas. But one-off payments evaporate fast. And what then? When prices continue to rise, when disabled people still can't access essential services, when owning a home is still out of reach, what supports will be available to people? Very little, because the coffers will have been drained in a matter of weeks in an attempt to buy an election. This approach to the allocation of state resources is reckless, and it is a missed opportunity. The Social Democrats would have used resources to invest in our public services, which have been starved of resources for more than a decade. Investing in affordable housing, universal healthcare, free education, quality disability services, and a public model of childcare. This would reduce the cost of living and build a strong social safety net, a floor beneath which people cannot fall. Instead, Cathaoirleach, two statistics tell the story of where the priorities of this government lie. Last year, the number of children experiencing deprivation went up by 30,000, 15%. That means 30,000 more children whose parents couldn't heat their home or buy them a warm coat. Shamefully, despite all of the money sloshing around this government, 1 in 5 children in the country are now in that position. Meanwhile, the total amount of state resources allocated to energy credits for holiday homes is now approaching €100 million. Why are we giving nearly €100 million to the owners of holiday homes rather than children living in poverty? Can anyone on the government benches answer that question? This government talks a good game when it comes to tackling child poverty. Former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar even set up a child poverty unit in his department, vowing to eradicate it. But as so often happens with this government, the rhetoric didn't match reality, and that commitment now lies in tatters. Is it any wonder when you look at this budget and examine the detail? Because a common thread quickly emerges. The more you have, the more you get. That is clear from the tax package, which disproportionately favours higher income earners, and from the failure to target supports at those who are really struggling. Another example that year after year I just can't get my head around is the 19.8 million to prop up the greyhound racing industry. Compare that with the 7.9 million for domestic violence initiatives when you consider the shortage of refuge spaces in the country. Zero tolerance, is it? Cearlach, if the government really wanted to use its resources to help the most vulnerable, two things were necessary: targeting supports where they are needed and tackling low pay. The government has increased core social welfare rates by €12. That figure appears to have been plucked out of the sky because it sounds a bit better than a tenner. But what is the rationale for the increase? What index is it benchmarked to? The Social Democrats believe that welfare rates should be linked to the minimum essential standards of living, not be at the whim of the minister of the day. To help get there, we would have increased rates by €25 per week this year. This would target critical support of pensioners, disabled people, lone parents and job seekers, people in our society who are most at risk of poverty. We would also have increased core supports in other ways. An additional €30 weekly cost of disability payment, a nearly 30% increase in financial supports to the most vulnerable children, an increase in the fuel allowance from €33 to €40, an extension of the fuel allowance to those in receipt of the working family payment, and an €8 increase in the living alone allowance. All of these measures would and could make a difference. We would also have committed to introducing a living wage in 2026 and increase the minimum wage by €130 to €14 per hour this year to get there. This government hasn't mentioned the living wage in a while. Maybe the minister can clarify if this is another commitment that now lies in tatters. Cearlach, I would like to encourage everyone in this House and everyone watching to read a column from Ciara Riley in the Irish Examiner. It is the best budget analysis that you will read today. Ciara's daughter, Doireann, is autistic and has a significant intellectual disability. Despite this, she says her family have, and I quote, "zero expectation of receiving any therapeutic help from the public system now or in the future. Budget 2025 did nothing to change that stark reality. Instead, they will have to use whatever meagre financial support they get and put it towards the €5,000 annual cost of private occupational therapy for Doireann. Her family must also find money for speech and language therapy, dietitian care, and for other therapies. Ciara describes this as privatisation by stealth, and she is right. This government has essentially waved a white flag and given up on providing these essential, critical services because there is virtually no help from the state when it comes to their provision. And without them, Doireann would suffer. She would not be able to reach her full potential. Can you see how this indiscriminate giveaway budget is a slap in the face to these families? Think about the families who cannot afford to pay privately for these essential therapies. Their children go on lengthy waiting lists for an assessment of need. Then when they receive a diagnosis, they're finally told what supports their children need. None of them are available. The only thing that they're guaranteed is a waiting list. Disability services are supposed to be another priority area for this government. Where is the evidence of that? Appointing a cabinet subcommittee to discuss the issue is easy, but where are the new measures? Where are the additional services? When will disabled people in this country have the services not only that they need, but that they are entitled to as a right? The Taoiseach said that special needs services are the biggest example of where siloed politics and siloed delivery of services has let children down. Well done to him for narrating the problem. But just to remind him, he has been sitting at the cabinet table for nearly a decade. He also spent 4 years as Minister for Health when disability services were in that portfolio. Can he tell us what, if anything, he is doing about that silo that developed on his watch? Yesterday, Mr. O'Donoghue stood in this chamber and spoke about the country having full employment, with no acknowledgement of the fact that we have the highest rate of unemployment amongst disabled people in Europe. There is nothing in this budget that will change that. Back in April, the Taoiseach promised that the government would ratify the optional protocol of the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabilities this year. This government is running out of time. Will that be another broken promise, or is that actually going to happen? The housing measures announced in this budget can be best described as too little, too late. For years, the Social Democrats have been saying that the 10% stamp duty on the bulk purchase of homes by vulture funds is too low. The Minister for Housing refused to listen. Throughout all the time, the government remained firmly on the side of vultures. Yesterday, weeks out from an election, he tried to pretend that their allegiances had shifted. An increase in stamp duty rate of 5% to 15% was announced. Pathetic. I don't know why he even bothered. First-time buyers cannot and should not have to compete with billion-dollar funds. That's why my colleague Cian O'Callaghan has been calling for a 100% tax and effective ban on vulture funds bulk buying homes for years. If you wanted to ban it, you would have. These half measures won't work. In fact, they are designed to fail. That wasn't the only disappointment. When I listened to the Minister yesterday refer to an increase in the vacancy tax, I thought, wow, maybe finally they'll act, they'll do something. But no, incredibly, you've increased the vacancy tax from 0.5% to 0.7% of the value of a home. In all fairness, house price inflation is at nearly 10%. On what planet is a vacant homes tax of 0.7% a disincentive from sitting on a property on an empty house while prices are skyrocketing by 10%? Why even bother? In my view, it is a blatant attempt to pretend to take action on vacancy while protecting the status quo. All while around 100,000 homes are lying empty around the country, and there are now nearly 4,500 children living in homelessness. The vacant homes tax should be linked to house price inflation, 10% at a minimum. This government is clearly not serious about bringing vacant homes back into use. Perhaps the biggest failure in the housing budget is the continued lack of ambition. The old targets that everyone knows are far too low remain in situ. The government is ignoring the expert reports that demand increased supply. There are some who have criticised this budget for the absence of a big idea or any vision, but I'm not sure I agree. I think there is one big idea and one vision that runs through it, and that is buying an election. The one-off payments galore between now and likely polling day. Was there ever such a blatant and transparent attempt to try to buy votes? Where is the imagination? Where is the ambition? Where is the political courage to invest, to improve this country for the better in the medium to long term? These record budget surpluses represented a unique opportunity to invest in public services, to transform people's lives, and the government chose not to. Having failed to make the structural reforms that are necessary to seriously improve people's lives in the long term, having failed to target resources to lift the most vulnerable out of poverty, having failed to reach any of your social or affordable housing targets any year you were in office, having failed to improve access to critical services for children with disabilities, having failed to transform our health service and fully implement Sláinte Care, having failed to reach our climate targets, having failed to improve our critical infrastructure like energy and water, the government is now resorting to splashing the cash around indiscriminately. All in an effort to distract from the fact that all of the crises that we face in health, in housing, in disability and climate will remain once these one-off payments evaporate. It goes to show that the Taoiseach can have all of the new energy in the world, but without any new ideas, we are simply going around in circles, repeating the mistakes that have been made in the past. All I can say is I hope people see through it.